On the hour, every day. News Radio 910 WSBA.
Welcome to a Friday morning edition of the Gary Sutton Show here on WSBA as we end the week in style. Busy day, busy week. We look back on that was the week that was, and so many things have happened. We'll try to round it all up, and we'll get your thoughts as well when it's your turn to make the call. In fact, it's always your turn to make the call throughout the show. If you've got a question or comment of our guests at 1-800-357-0910. You can also check me out on Twitter at Gary G. Sutton and email me at gary.sutton@cumulus.com. But we start out this morning with a guy we have every Friday about this time. He's like clockwork. He is the financial strategist at Hodges Capital, and his name is Clark Hodges, and he joins us here on the Gary Sutton Show. Good morning, my friend. How are you?
I'm really good. It's Friday. How are you today?
Every day is Friday for me. I'm serious. I know that's disgusting, but every day is Friday for me. Don't you feel the same way? You get up and you know what? For a lot of reasons, I'm very blessed to be able to get up every day. Both feet hit the ground. I can move, and I get to leave the house and go do something I love to do. And, it's a good thing. And maybe with the exception of Monday, every day is Friday for me, too. Yeah, Monday is like Friday's Eve. It's always like, it's like Christmas Eve, it's Friday's Eve. But, I remember the old George Allen, George Burns.
Yeah.
And George Burns used to say, the old comedian, he said, I got up, he said, I checked the obituary column, if my name wasn't in it, I lit up a cigar and started the day. So that's kind of where I'm at every single day.
Attitude is everything.
You look back on the week that was here, what hit you this week? I mean, we often like to look back and kind of round up the whole week. Anymore, it's like we have a major issue every single day. But as you look at it, maybe intertwine it a little bit with the economy or not, what strikes you this week, Clark?
I'm amazed in the last few weeks at how much bad news there is on a global scale, yet gas prices are coming down, the stock market's pretty resilient, the people who are out spending money, consumers, are in a pretty good mood.
Right.
And that's surprising to me. In August, a summer month with bad news all around, and gas prices coming down, that's very surprising to me. So I'm shocked by that, but at the same time, I'm kind of saddened by all the really bad news and scary news, and more you hear about ISIS, the reporter getting killed, and things like that. It just puts a bad taste in your mouth. Yeah,
I think you're right. I think all of us, and I was talking to a couple of people about this, including my wife, and I said, summertime is a time where we don't want to hear bad news. I mean, now, that's a very selfish thing to say, but I don't think we want to hear bad news anytime. And yet, by the same token, we don't control that. And, I was talking to another friend last Friday. We were playing golf together, and I said, I'd like everybody in the world to live together in peace. I'd like to think that we can all get along out there, and that, we can all have our little chunk of the world and just work at it and forget about everything else. And yet at the same time, there are people out there like ISIS, who you mentioned a moment ago, who don't seem to want to do that really seem to be more, if you're not part of us, then you're dead. And that's not where we want to be, I think, at least through our Western view of things, right?
Not at all. And the real sad thing and shocking thing is that they see, from what I understand, death as a calling card to a great life in heaven. And so if they die doing what they feel is defending their religion, then they have a better place in heaven, so to speak. And that's scary to me. They want to die doing what they're doing.
And see, therein lies the great problem, I think, in our world today, and we've talked about it a lot this week, but it bears repeating, that when we had the years of the Cold War, where we didn't really fire shots, but Russia and us squared off in a Cold War that seemed to be always kind of, it made you a little shaky, and yet at the same time, both sides knew that, the lighting up of a nuclear weapon was going to really cause potentially the end of the earth, or some terrible, terrible damage. Now it seems like we've got groups out there that don't care even about that have kind of opened a box of evils that I'm not sure we can pull shut again, and we might end up being kind of in and I hate to say this, an eternal war-waging kind of thing, because they are forcing us to do that. I think we're trying to get away from that. We're trying to withdraw, and at the same time, no one wrote the memo to these guys to let them know that, hey, it's over. We're supposed to be stopping the terror.
Yeah, I know he's a punching bag for us sometimes, but you hear all this, you take all this in, and then you see the president playing golf on Martha's Vineyard. He seems very disconnected by all this, and I think that's the time when leadership should come to the forefront and help the American people understand this and put it somewhere. You got to compartmentalize these kinds of headlines, not only domestically but internationally, and it's something we need leadership on, and I don't think we're getting it.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think, the optics of that. The president is on vacation. Hey, we'd like to all be on vacation, but when things are pretty serious overseas, and even here at home, we'd like to also know that the president, much like David Cameron did over in Great Britain, a guy from Great Britain killed this Foley guy this week. Well, that was enough to get David Cameron back home because it was serious business. And the idea that our president, right after he makes a speech at Martha's Vineyard, goes back out in the golf course, whether that's right or not, whether you say, listen, I think the president deserves a vacation, I don't think there's any tougher job in the world. By the same token, what does that tell the American people? And I thought the president had some good things to say there, and there were some things I disagreed with, but I thought he had some good things to say there, and then he walks out and plays golf. And it's like, oh, c'est la vie, that's it. So, I think we want our leader to be doing more during this time than less.
Right. I think there's a point where you cut your vacation short, and the death of an American is, I think, a good starting point. I mean, it's serious business, and I don't know. It just puts a bad taste in my mouth for sure.
I saw a story, and I hate to keep on piling bad news on, but it's not really bad news. It's just more like status quo of how the government acts. And again, when we turn over Obamacare to the government and all those kind of things, this is just a reminder of the tough things that bureaucracy goes to. But I was reading a story about the Social Security Administration that they issued more than $3 million in benefit payments to individuals whose personal identification information matched those of that of those who died in California during the 1980s, according to the Office of the Inspector General's audit report of the SSA, the Social Security Administration. It said that the Office of the Inspector General determined that 14 beneficiaries were deceased. OI and SSA determined that the Social Security Administration issued approximately $3 million in improper payments in these cases, explains the audit, entitled Payments to Individuals with Deaths Reported in California from 1980 to 87. I mean, once again, it's another example of what happens when our government tries to handle these kind of things. And Social Security is something that people get very, very tender about, isn't it, Clark?
Yeah, it really is. And it is another example of the ineptitude of our government when it comes to spending our money and managing our money. I think that my issue with people saying we should pay more taxes, why? It's not being spent correctly. And when someone gives a company or an individual a hard time for wanting a tax deduction and taking a legal tax deduction and spending time trying to figure out if there's any way to get more of a tax deduction, that's okay with me because the government certainly can't spend our money wisely. And those people who have money, by and large, in America, I believe, help people less fortunate through churches and charities and things like that. And so I'm a big proponent of that, but I agree 100% that it's a mess, and that's a delicate place to have a mess up in, really.
There's another place yesterday we're talking about money, and it comes again with the military. The Government Accountability Office issued an opinion yesterday that found that the Obama administration violated two laws when it ordered the transfer of 5 high-profile Taliban commanders in exchange for Sergeant Bo Bergdahl. We all remember that happening some time ago. And it said, we conclude that the Department of Defense violated Section 8111 because it did not notify the relevant congressional committees at least 30 days in advance of the transfer and thus the spending of money. As a consequence of using its appropriations in a manner specifically prohibited by law, the Department of Defense violated the Anti-Deficiency Act. And so what they're saying is that they basically spent money and did it in a way that was unlawful, and yet here's an administration that doesn't seem to get bothered by any of that. They just do what they want to do, right?
Right, because there's no accountability by the press. This story will be washed over and forgotten about in a couple of days. And to add to all that, he may have broken a law, which is bad enough, but the people he let go, that's horrible. Just the worst of the worst, the scum of the earth, the worst people that we as Americans could imagine getting out of prison and going back to their country as heroes. That's worse to me than any technicality that he broke a law. But nothing will come of it. No one will talk about it. And
we're talking about it, but that's voices of the wilderness right now.
Yeah.
But we remember this guy Al Baghdadi. It was released in 2009. Is we can release these guys back out. He's now the head of ISIS. I mean, the guy is basically running ISIS, and we say, he won't be that bad. Guess what? They're coming back in spades, and now these 5 guys who were with Al Qaeda are now. Where do you think they're going to end up at? Al Qaeda essentially has joined ISIS for the most part, and now we have these 5 guys out there. Is there anybody that doesn't think by next year, if not before, they leave Qatar and they go back into the fight as well?
No doubt, leadership matters, and little decisions can be very detrimental down the road, whether you're talking about managing money, whether you're talking about anything. And this is a prime example of that, I think. Go ahead. But it's just another example that a decision that was probably hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about, and then had the combination of us taking all these troops out of that area, it's just a bad decision.
You've talked about immigration, and we may have different opinions on this, but by the same token, I think now with looking at this jihadist group, and they're talking about they want to blow up this morning's news, they want to blow up a major American city. When you look at this, it does put another spin now on immigration, where we better learn how to lock down on these people coming into the country right now, because there's an open avenue right now to terrorism, right?
You bet. There's all reason to believe that ISIS may have come into the United States through Mexico.
Yeah.
And that's frightening. They're on this soil, and we have reason to be concerned. But then you go, and that's the bad news. But then nobody seems to really be too upset about it.
I know.
The markets kind of indicate that, And it's very strange to me that this bad news is out there, and so many economic things seem okay.
It seems like we're going to live good lives, and we're going to continue to live like we normally do, despite all this garbage. Maybe that's, I'm reminded of Israel, who's, since 1948 has lived with a cloud over them every single day, and I'm thinking maybe worldwide, we and other countries like us that espouse liberty are going to have to learn how to live in this, and yet with the same understanding that terrible things can happen on the moment's notice.
Definitely, and I hope it's not that kind of situation, because
I do too.
It does seem to be that we're kind of insulated from this bad news here in the United States, and we got our own problems here domestically with race wars and things like that going on that we've all seen in the news. But it is very strange to me how there's not much going on economically as a fear point to all this bad news we've seen.
Well, Clark, hopefully we find some good news this time next week. We'll see you next Friday morning. I'll spit it out eventually, my friend. You can see what happens at the end of the week. Everything just kind of falls down and it's decrepit. But next Friday morning at 9:05, okay?
Okay, Gary. Thanks.
Have a great weekend. Take care. Thanks. Clark Hodges with us here on the Gary Sutton Show. When we come back, Dr. Nick Pandelides, who blogs under Dr. Wright, talks about crony capitalism. A local bloggers look at what's happening around us with crony capitalism. All here on the Gary Sutton Show on News Radio 910 WSBA.